Hello there all my lovely jewelry makers, I'm Christina at CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this ombre diagonal wire crochet bracelet. Now I made two different versions here just to show you the effects you can get, so both the ombre one with the purple colours, and then I also made a rainbow one, so obviously you can do whatever you want to, even come up with something completely different. Now these bracelets will be available for sale in my shop, so I'm going to leave a link to that in the description box down below, but if you want to learn how you can make your own, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we'll need. First of all, the wire that I'm using is a regular round silver coated copper wire and the gauge is a 0.4mm. And then we'll need our beads. The specific ones I'm using are these 3mm preciosa bicone beads, and I'm just using 3 different colours to create an ombre effect. But you can of course mix and match your colours however you want to, and even play around with using different kinds of beads. To finish off the ends of the bracelet, I'm going to be using these ribbon ends here. They have little loops in them so we can attach our findings. And for that I'm using a lobster claw clasp, an extended chain and a few jump rings to put it together. But you can of course use whatever kind of clasp that you prefer or even make your own. And with the ribbon ends I'm also going to be using this E6000 glue. It's going to make it strong and durable. And then we'll need a few tools as well. So first of all I got my flush cutter so we can cut our wire. I'm using some tweezer nose pliers and chain nose pliers to manipulate the wire and also for the jump rings. And finally, and most importantly, we of course need the crochet hook. So the specific size that I'm using is a 1.25mm, but you don't have to use that specific size, just make sure it's a small one. And like usual, you'll be able to find the material list and useful links in the description box down below. Otherwise, let's get it all ready and let's get started. As for the wire, I'm leaving it attached to the reel because it's hard to know exactly how much we're going to need, and also that way we have minimum wastage. So to get started, I'm going to grab my crochet hook, and then also I'm starting towards one end of my wire here. I'm just going to leave a short little tail we can hold on to. Then I'm going to bring this wire over my index finger and then put the crochet hook in between my finger and the wire. And then we're going to make the first loop by just doing one full rotation here, and then take that out. You can see we have our first loop. So from here I'm now going to start the wire crochet. So I've got the long length that's still attached to the reel that's coming behind the loop. Just hold on to that tail below the loop there. It's a little bit fiddly to begin with, but it gets easier to hold on to as we get a few loops made. So to make the next loop I'm going to go with my crochet hook and grab onto the wire that's behind the loop, pull it through so it comes out to the front of the loop, and then to enlarge it I'm going to push the crochet hook through to the shaft part, which is the widest part there, so before the handle, and then pull it out a little bit further. Then I'm going to rotate the crochet hook again so the hook part goes away from me, and then flatten it down. So I now have a second loop right on top of the first one, and they're laying flat next to each other. And then basically we just need to continue like that. It's already easier now because you can now hold on to the first loop that we made, and then to make the third loop, put the crochet hook through, pull the wire through the loop, push the crochet hook through there to enlarge it, and then pull it out a little bit further, and then rotate it away from you and flatten it down. And that is basically how we're making a row of loops here. And you just want to keep going like this. You'll find a rhythm as you do it until we have the amount of loops that we need for the length we need for the bracelet. So now I made my full row of loops here. It looks a little something like this, and what I've ended up with in total is 49. So obviously you can make more or less loops depending on the size you want for your bracelet. In this case, this one is going to end up being about 7 inches including the clasp, so that's just for reference. Now to continue we need to keep making loops, but I'm not going to make them in a straight line like we were doing. So bring the wire through to make another loop, but instead of then bringing it up and continuing, I'm going to now bring it out to the side. So basically we create a little corner there, and then you can swap how you're holding your piece. And for this next row we're making from this corner, this is now 2 loops. We have already the corner one, which was the last one in the first row, and then the second one is the one we just made. Now I'm going to make a few more loops. And basically this is going to end up being one end of the bracelet. So that's 3, 4, 5, and 6. And that is the width that I'm going to make my bracelet here. And since I've then done that, I need to pull the wire through again, make another loop. And we now need to come back up the other side. So I'm going to again bring this loop to the side and basically make another corner. You can rotate your piece. And now we need to make another row of loops here, basically equivalent to the first one. So again, I've made 2 loops in it already. Just continue making more loops and end up making as many loops as you have on the other side. So now I made it to the other end here. I've made the same amount of loops as the other side, and you might find that the two lengths of the sides here aren't exactly the same length. Don't worry too much about that, because it's most important that we actually get the same amount of loops rather than the length itself, because we can always adjust that. So when you have the right amount of loops, we then need to start making the other end as well. So again, bring the wire through, make a new loop, this time bring it to the side, and then we just need to make this end, but as we're doing it, we also need to start the center of the bracelet. So make another loop, that's now 3, and then I'm doing the 4th one, and then from here we haven't fully finished this end yet, but I'm just going to start making another row from this one. So from the 4th loop from the corner there, I'm now again bringing this to the side, and this is going to basically be our first diagonal line. So that's 1 loop, you can keep rotating however you need to hold it, and then make another loop, pull that out, and I'm now going in the direction back up towards the long row that we're coming from, and then the 3rd loop, not including the one that's on the outer edge there, just counting the ones that are in between the rows. So we have these 3 loops. Now what they need to do is reach back up towards this long row that we're coming from, and I'm going to count from the corner. So 1, 2, and 3. Make sure I'm through the final loop that we just made, and then also go through that 3rd loop. So we now have 2 loops on the crochet hook, and then just pull this length of wire tight so it tightens around the crochet hook so it's not too loose or anything, and you can just have a look and kind of start to get the feel of what we're doing. So we're kind of starting to connect the 2 sides. Obviously we haven't fully made the frame yet, but that's what we're going to be in the process of doing. Now to connect this, I'm just going to pull through the wire and create another loop like that. And then I want to go back down all the loops that we just made, so back down the path here. So just keep your crochet hook through the loop we just made and then put it through the previous one. That's right below where we're just coming from, like that. Again, rotate your piece however you need to. We're going back down the same row that we just made, so the diagonal one. Pull the wire through, and then make another loop, go through the next one, make another loop, and then go through the next one. And this one is the last one we made in the outer frame, which is the end, which is the one we didn't finish yet. So go through that, and now we need to finish this end off. So again, make another loop, and now I'm going to continue this row of loops that we made. So we already made 4, which is going to be the end of the bracelet, like I said. So we need to make the 5th one and the 6th one, because that is the same amount of loops that we made on the other end. So again, the amount of loops is more important than the actual length, and you can always go back through your loops if you need to adjust anything. So there we go, we now have this end finished, and what we need to do now is connect the full frame. So just make sure it's not twisted in any way. I'm gonna go through all the loops here, back to the very first one that we made, which is right there. Then I'm going to stay through that last loop we just made with a crochet hook, and then also go through the very first one. So again, I've got 2 loops on my hook now, and then the wire is coming down behind them to connect the full frame on this corner. Just pull a new loop through, and then we basically have the full frame connected now. So now what we need to do is continue to make the diagonal lines inside of it, and we have already made the first one there, and I'm going to go straight into the next one. So from this corner, this loop that we pulled out, I'm going to just rotate my piece and bring it in to the middle of the frame. So it's basically coming from that very corner and going in towards the middle, and then we're going to keep making a row here, working our way diagonally up towards the other side of the frame. So that was 1 loop, and then that's the second one. I'm not counting the one that's in the actual corner, I'm just counting the ones that are within the frame here. So that's 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'm going to make the 6th one as well. So I made the diagonal line with 6 loops. Then we need to connect this to the opposite side of the frame. So what I'm going to do is basically check where the last connection point was. That's the very first diagonal row that we made. From that connection point in the frame, I'm going to count 1, 2. So basically skip one loop and go through the next one. Pull this length of wire tight, and then you're going to be able to see that this length that we just made now crosses from, in this case, the corner down here to the opposite side of the frame, and it's diagonal. And then to connect it, pull through the wire to make another loop, rotate your piece, and then go back up the same diagonal line there, one loop at a time through each one. And doing this also basically reinforces these rows of loops, all the way back down to that original corner that we came from. And then also go through that corner like that, pull it nice and tight. And then we need to move to the next loop on this side of the frame to make the next diagonal line. So pull out another loop, go straight to the next loop in the frame there, right next to it. And every time you do, make sure you pull this wire tight. It kind of neatens up the loops as well in case they're a little bit uneven. And then go through the next one. And same principle as on the top row there. We are skipping one loop and then going from the next one here and making the next row of loops. And that's going to be the pattern throughout. So there's basically going to be one empty loop in between each of the diagonal lines. So from here, rotate your piece however you need to. Bring this loop into the middle of the frame, same as when we went from the corner, and then make this row of loops within the frame here. And we just want to do the same amount as we did on the previous row. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the sixth one is the one that's going to get connected to the opposite side of the frame. So like before, count from the previous connection point, skip one and go through the second one, making sure you're also through the last loop that we made, and pull the wire tight, bring another loop through, and then we need to work our way back down the same row there. So go through the previous one, pull another loop through, and just work your way back down the same row to the opposite side of the frame. And then as we've gotten down to the other end here, again go back to the frame as well and connect it there, pull it tight, and then you can really start to see the effect of the diagonal rows of the loops that we're making. Now move on to create the next one. So pull a loop out, go sideways in the frame here through the next loop, and then the second one. So again, we're skipping one loop, and through the second one, I'm going to then start the next diagonal line from that. So make sure to bring that loop into the frame, and then just continue making the 6 loops in total here. So we can reach the other side of the frame. And then with the 6th one there, we go from the previous connection point, skip one loop and go through the second one after that, connect it, and then just like the other times, make a new loop and go back down the same row of loops, the diagonal line here. Make your way back down just like the other times, get to the bottom, move over to create the next diagonal line, and just keep going like this all the way until the other end, and we've filled out the whole inside of the bracelet as well. And now I'll reach the other end here. I'm gonna make another row of loops inside the frame. So again, I'm making the 6 loops, but as you can see, I'm running out of the row on top. So just making my last loop. That is gonna then fit perfectly to go into the very corner loop on the top side. And then otherwise, go back down just like the other times. And once we reach the bottom, we again go to the side here because we still have just a little bit of space in that corner. So we just need to make one more row to fill that in. So 1, 2 to the side. And then from here, I'm gonna again bring this in to the middle of the frame, and then just make my row in here. So I've got 2 loops now, and that's going to fill this gap in nicely, because what we need to do is reach to the loop on the end here. That's again 2 away from the corner, which was the last connection point. So 1, 2. I need to reach the 3rd one from the top, or you could count the 4th one from the bottom. So I just need to make one more loop to be the actual one I use for the connection point. So make the 3rd one and then go through that loop on the end, and then we just connect these again. So this is basically how we started out as well. We have this row that's a bit shorter than the rest of them, just to kind of fill in the corners on the ends, and then just go back down all the way to where this row started. And then we basically added in all these diagonal rows all the way along. filling in this space in the middle of the frame. Now you might find that your bracelet looks a bit wonky, as you can see here as well. It's a little bit weirdly shaped, but that is partly because on one side we've made more loops than we have on the other side, because this is where the rows in the middle started from, and obviously the top one is where they're connected. So this one technically has more loops on top of each other, so basically more layers to it. So that is kind of what we're going to make up for now. And to do that, all I'm going to do is go back to where the loop I just pulled out is. And we want to now go back out into the frame here. So I'll go through the very next loop, bring out a new one, and just literally move one loop along at a time. Now going around the corner and just following onto the end, and just continue doing this all the way up the side as well. And do remember, every time we go through, to pull the wire tight on the new loop that we're making, because it's going to help neaten everything up as well. So I'm going to go all the way around back down to the other end, because like I said, this side has more layers, so we want to kind of equal out the rest of it. And by going around and doing that, and also making sure we pull this wire tight, as you can see as I'm pulling that now, it's going to tighten up the loop, the new one, and that just helps neaten everything up. So it's going to stabilize the bracelet more and make it straighter. So like I said, just literally keep going down this side, doing that all the way along. Also down the other end as well, just back down to where we started out. So now I've reached all the way down to the other end here, and I've also gone down the side, and I've reached that original corner, and you can already tell it looks a lot neater now, because we're basically straightening it out by adding the extra layer on the other sides as opposed to just the one. But then now we are done doing the wire crochets, so I can cut this wire off the reel. Now what I'm doing is leaving a tail of about 1 meter and 30 centimeters, because I like to then use this length that's still attached to actually add in the beads. Now you can of course always attach a new length if you want to, but then what I'm going to do is here on the end where I'm through that corner loop, I'm just going to pull the wire through just like I normally would, and then instead of making another loop and continuing to go through the other ones, I'm literally going to keep pulling this and pull it all the way through so the end of the wire comes through. And then you'll find that the very last loop that we made is a little loose, so what I like to do is take the end of my wire here and just bring it down through the next loop, just in between some of the wires, and pull it all the way tight, because that then tightens up that very final loop that we made so it's not loose. But now we basically need to start adding in the beads. So first of all, we need to get this wire into position, and I'm just going to start from one end of the bracelet and work my way all the way along. So of course I'm just going to start down by where I am. Now we can't forget the short row of loops here, so I want to just get to that one first. So you literally can just kind of weave in and out of the loops, working your way up towards the beginning of that row, and you just want to get the wire here to where that row starts, and we're in a position to be able to start adding beads. And I'm only going to be adding beads to the inside rows, not to the outer frame. Of course you can do that if you want to, it's completely up to you really how you add your beads. This is just what I prefer to do. So pull that nice and tight, and now I'm going to get my beads ready. So I'm just grabbing 2 beads of my first color to begin with. And then I'm going to add a bead onto my wire, let it drop all the way down like that. And then I want to make sure that the bead is going to sit on top of the loop sideways. So that means I'm going to basically jump over that loop and go down through the next one and pull the wire all the way through. And as I'm pulling it tight, I'm going to make sure the bead sits where I want it to. Get back to the end of the wire, and then I want to go back through the loop where the bead is sitting on top of, from the back towards the front. So if you need to, you can always push the bead away a little bit, and then pull the wire all the way through, making sure the bead stays where I put it, and then just pull that nice and tight. And then the wire is already in position now to add in the next bead, because I want to add a bead basically on top of each of the loops on these inner diagonal rows. So I'll grab the next bead, add that onto the wire, let it drop down, and then because this is the last loop on this row, I want to then take the end of the wire and go back out to the frame. So just go through again over the top of the loop where I want the bead to sit, and as I'm pulling it tight, I'm making sure that bead is going to sit sideways on top of the loop. And now I just need to make my way to the next diagonal row. So I'm just going to use the frame for that. Again, just kind of stitch in and out of the loops as you need to, because that way the wire that we're using here, it blends in nicely with the wire crochet that we've already done. So it's not going to stand out in any way. So I'm making my way to the first loop in the next row there. Make sure the wire comes out just next to that first loop where the bead is going to sit on top of. Pull it nice and tight. And in this case, I'm going to use a different color of beads. So again, I just kind of like to get the beads out that I need per row as I'm working with it. Ready? So in this case, this is a full row, so I'm going to use 5 beads for that. Get the first one onto the wire, let it drop all the way down, and then skip over the loop that we want the bead to sit on and go through the next one. And also pull it tight, making sure that bead is going to sit sideways on top of the first loop. And then we just want to bring the wire up through the loop the bead is sitting on top of. Pull the wire tight, and then we are already in position with the wire to just add in the next bead. So add it to the end, let it drop all the way down, and again skip over the loop where we want the bead to sit, go down through the next one, and that is basically just how I'm adding in the beads. Now obviously you can do it however you want to. This is just how I prefer to do it. And you just want to keep going like this. So we're basically snaking our way through all these diagonal rows of loops and just make your way all the way to the other end. So now I've finished adding in all the beads. Then what we're going to do is get rid of these little tails of the wire. So what you just want to do is find a place where you have a single wire in the wire crochet, and then just take the end of your wire and close to where it's coming out from, feed it through like that, and then pull it tight. And then what you want to do is wrap it around that single wire a couple of times, basically coiling it around, and do that until you feel like it's nice and secure, something like that. And then I'm just going to bring the wire around, but not wrap it around again. I'm going to then cut off the excess, and then you're going to have a little end of the wire there sticking out. So just make sure to take your tweezer nose and just tuck that away so it's well within the wire crochet, then you can't feel it anymore. And then we can just do the same with the tail on the other end as well. Now we've finished off the wire, we need to finish off the ends here. So this is where I'm going to attach my ribbon ends, and I'm also going to be using the glue because putting these on the metal, they won't obviously be very durable. So I'm just going to start with one at a time, and then I get my glue, and then I just get a bit onto a toothpick, and I want to put it inside of the ribbon end here. Just cover the inside walls, you don't have to fill it up fully. And then I also like to put some on the actual end of the bracelet. So make sure to just get it in between the wire there and all the nooks and crannies. Because that way when we put the two together and the glue dries, they're going to really adhere nicely. Then we can put the ribbon end over the end of the bracelet. I'm grabbing then my chain nose pliers or flat nose, and you want to start clamping this down. So I like to hold it in my hand and then put a finger on either end. And then start clamping this down a little bit at a time, going from one side to the other. And obviously be careful of the beads, we don't want them being caught up within the ribbon end, it's just going to crush them. So just make sure we clamp it down there, and when you're happy with how it sits and it's almost fully clamped down, I just double check that it's still in the middle, and then go in and do the final squeeze, make it nice and tight. And then I also like to just go in from the sides just to close them up nicely. Then of course we need to repeat the same thing on the other end as well, and then we have these loops in the ribbon ends that we can attach our clasp. And now I've attached my clasp there and extended chain. The last thing I like to do is just shape the bracelet, because even though it is soft, so obviously it will go around your wrist easily, I do find that if you just leave it like this, it doesn't sit that nicely, because you can see here it looks a bit funky. So what I do like to do is just shape it a bit, so kind of help it along. So you just want to add a bit of a curve into it so it will sit nicely around the wrist. So something a bit like that, and then you have your bracelet finished and ready to wear. So that is how you make this elegant diagonal wire crochet bracelet, and you can achieve some really cool results depending on the beads that you add in, whether that's like the ombre one or even the rainbow one that I did, or of course you can come up with something completely different. Now if you like wire crochet designs, I have a whole playlist full of them. I'm going to leave a link to that in the description box down below. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for watching it, and I'll see you in the next one.